Welcome to the Empowered Learning Experience with Peter Riddle, where we discuss education, brain-based memory and learning strategies, and a weekly learning clinic providing hands-on tools for success in school, business, and life. Welcome to the first episode of the Empowered Learning Experience with Peter Riddle. I'm Peter Riddle, president and co-founder of the Empowered Learning Institute and the Empowered Learning Transformational Centers. And before we dive in, I want to clarify this podcast operates separately from my work at the Institute and the centers, but it draws upon my extensive experience in brain-based research and brain-based hands-on training, which I've been doing for over 30 years. My goal is providing cost-free all of the knowledge and hands-on experience I have working with children and adults to benefit anyone listening out there to implement immediately and see the results immediately. What we're doing is basically affecting your personal intelligence, your ability to really navigate life and navigate the different challenges that you may face in work, in school, or in just personal relationships in life. When I say personal intelligence, I'm referring to you as a person, a lot more than just what you academically learn in school. But how do you navigate life? How do you communicate? What is your self-esteem, your rapport skill? What is the quality of your self-talk? What are your personal skills as well as your business skills? These will all interact to develop your personal intelligence. With the advent of artificial intelligence and the use in all of the areas of life, your personal intelligence and the development of it has never been more important. So our main topic today will focus on how the brain learns. But before we get into that, I want to just speak quickly about how our schools are failing us. And this is one of the reasons for this podcast, is to deliver information directly to families that could have a direct impact on how you work with your kids and the kind of results you see with them. All right, so by design, the schools really have been failing for the last 50 years. With over 48 years of dedicated research and 30 years of hands-on brain training, I've had the privilege of working with tens of thousands of students, teachers, business people, employing cutting-edge learning strategies. Our center's mission lies in enhancing all of the intelligences, all of them, including emotional intelligence, through advanced brain training exercises that at a core level affect sensory motor integration, visual processing, cognitive functioning, and eventually executive function. Today's topic will be on how your brain learns. But before we get into that topic, we're going to discuss really what's going on in our schools today. Our schools are failing us like they've never failed us before. And what are parents and teachers involved in their children's education? What are they to do when they see the system failing them? And every year, there seems to be something new coming out, a new way to improve education. There's been the new math back in the 90s. And then 15 years later, there was the new math, which we're teaching our children today. The new math that we're teaching our children today really is designed not to involve the parents with their child's education, not to let them help them. It's not the way that they learned math. And I just have one question. Every 10 or 15 years, we come out of a new way of teaching math. Why have the math scores plummeted over the last 50 years? Now, they've really accelerated during the pandemic backwards, further than we've ever seen them. They're at 50-year lows. The same thing is happening to our reading skills. They're at 50-year lows. Now, for many years, I've done workshops in universities, training the future special ed teachers and teachers that will be coming into our classrooms. And what we're teaching teachers today in the classroom to prepare for the problems we have today are in no way directly related to the drop in reading and math scores. A lot of the teachers are having a difficult time working with kids today because they're not prepared to deal with the problems coming into the classroom. There are emotional, dramatic problems. And by the way, the closure of the school systems for COVID-19 was the most disastrous thing we've ever done to our children. Educationally, emotionally, The kids have been scarred for life, especially early childhood, especially kids with special needs. What you've seen the damage done by not developing these kids properly during those critical years, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, walking around with masks on, not seeing people speak, not seeing their lips. Children with learning disabilities, reading disabilities, autistic kids, Down syndrome kids, all had a major delay in development that may have delayed them for a lifetime in certain areas. You have to understand how the brain learns. The brain operates differently for all of us, but there are windows of opportunities for learning language, learning music, and some other things that once that window is closed, it's very difficult to develop it on a core level as a core ability. So as we do the instructions for learning strategies and techniques to help you learn, you have to understand that there are things that are happening out there today, the way that they're presented, that goes directly against the way our brain learns. If you look at the way that we deal with problems that children are having, we fragment everything to these kids. They see an OT, a PT, a speech therapist, they're in special ed, they're being pulled out of classrooms. Everything becomes fragmented. Well, I have the exact opposite approach. I believe that every brain operates the same way, that the neural networks set up in the brain are there for a reason. And if we develop those neural networks, we'll get the same results. When we work at our centers, we don't group by age or ability. Everyone is put together, and we teach the same thing to everyone. You know, you look at the schools today when I work with kids with their homework, and I see what they bring home as far as support material. I can't believe what our schools are doing to our families. There is nothing in the packets of information that are taken off of the internet that can replace textbooks and instructional books that would help guide students and parents if a child doesn't get something. Now they're coming home with sheets of paper taken off of the internet with generalized instructions, and half of the time the parent's clueless if the child has a problem with it. Now, we'll get in future episodes into all the support you actually can get through the internet. But I want to make one thing clear. If you're a parent working with a child, this starts from birth. The phone, iPad, computer are the worst thing possible for developing a lifetime reader or a lifetime learner, as opposed to reading from a book or paper. The moment you go to a screen, there's a 50% comprehension loss. And this is all the research shows this. And a 50% comprehension loss, that when students only get their information off of a computer, an iPad, or a phone, that becomes the way they read. And that's the way they comprehend. And they need a second or third read, or they're not going to do as well. And most kids are not going to do that second or third read. And if you are that student, well, those are the 8 students I get in my center that have high anxiety, stress when it comes to learning, and that's not the best way to become a lifetime learner. So the absence of really the right tools the schools are not using anymore, the absence of the parents being exposed to those tools so they can help their child, had created a system of chaos where kids aren't learning and they're not doing their homework. They're missing a lot of school. And this is one of the reasons why parents have decided to homeschool many of the children. So this is one of the reasons we're doing the podcast, as being an ongoing aid for the parents who decided to homeschool their children, or parents that are now, because of the pandemic, know what's going on in school and are doing everything possible to help their child. We are going to be that brain hack for you, the best way to learn math, history, language arts. Doesn't matter what it is, we'll show you the technique or the discipline that can aid you dramatically in acquiring and retaining permanently information. So just another quick thing, script, being able to write in cursive. We're not teaching that to our kids anymore. And I can't tell you the damage that's happening to special needs kids not being taught script. Because they're horrible printers. Most special needs kids, you can't read their printing. It's either too small or too large. They can't stay on lines. All of a sudden, you introduce cursive to them, And that movement, the freedom of the hand, I can't believe the difference with some kids in cursive and some kids in printing. Now we're not even seeing that anymore. It's almost as if printing is the only way to teach a child now. That's what I'm seeing in schools. They're eliminating cursive writing. By the way, I can't tell you how many kids don't have a signature. I actually trained some of my students come back to help with the teaching here, and I find that they don't have a signature, and I teach them their signature. That's one of the 3 things to identify a person. And we're not even teaching it anymore. And again, for special needs kids, for kids who have developmental issues, that freedom of writing changes everything for them. So again, one of the things I don't fully understand. And when we look about schools and really the reason they were originally set up there was nothing before this as far as government-funded schools. You may have gone to a university here, a Christian university there, and so on, but there was no organized education system. And when it was started, there were 3 basic reasons to start a school in this country: to deliver academic excellence to everyone on the same level, to teach moral values, and also to teach national unity, national pride. Now today, very few schools are meeting all 3 of those demands. Most of them are failing at all 3. And we need to get back to that. And that's what you should be doing if you're homeschooling. And that's why you're homeschooling, is to provide those 3 things for your child. And that's what's lacking from our system. So by the way, the school closures have put millions of kids into a psychological struggle that really parents and teachers don't know how to deal with. The emotional, the stress, the anxiety, the depression. Our kids today are experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder. The same thing someone in the military might experience, or really kids who are in a war zone, and many times for years, and that emotional scar they carry the rest of their lives. That's what COVID-19 shutdown did to a lot of these kids. Suicide rates have tripled. Right, the amount of kids really not going to school today, truancy rates are through the ceiling. All of these things are connected and are intertwined into why everything is so fragmented today. And there seems to be no national spirit, no national unity, and no national agenda for schools. Another thing I experienced working with kids, I can't believe the difference in curriculum from one school to the next. History from one school to the next. When I was a kid, the history books were decided, textbooks, and they were national. A school district can decide, but there were only 3 or 4 to choose from. And the message was the same. The messages now are different depending on where you go to school. A school in Texas will definitely be delivering history differently than the school in California. And it depends on the district you're in, but an inner city school will be totally different than a suburban school. And that should not be. There should be one understanding of history with different ways to look at it, but one understanding of what it actually is. And it has to be in context. We can't isolate information, teach it to our kids, and that's the universe. That's what's going on today. Personal views of teachers are getting into the way of teaching history, teaching science, teaching math. I've never seen anything like this as far as a way of confusing parents and confusing the students with an agenda that has nothing to do with personal development and personal intelligence. So that's what schools are for. That's what if you're homeschooling, that's what it's for. So as we do this show, we'll have guests on the show, educational and parenting experts on the show. And I also want to relate to you that this is not my first go-around, my first rodeo. In the 1990s, for 4 years, I had a show on WNYE called Empowered Learning with Peter Riddle. This was a show for the Board of Ed in New York City. I would have everyone from the Chancellor, Ramon Cortines and Rudy Crew, to different political figures, different educational figures, Secretary Riley, who was the Secretary of Education for the United States, Madeline Kunin, the Undersecretary of Education for the United States, David Kearns, the former CEO of Xerox, who was an Undersecretary of Education. And the main purpose of that show was parental involvement. was having the parent as the most child's and first and most important teacher. And teaching that child is the most important thing in that parent's life. That was the whole purpose of the show. Edna Suarez Columba, who was the head of parental involvement for the city of New York, I became very close to. She did several shows with me. I actually went down to Nova University with her. We delivered many workshops. I'll go into that in one of my shows. But it was an agenda of the New York City public school system that every parent be involved with their child. Every month there was a parenting workshop at a public school. Well, there was for private and parochial schools, and I will tell you the difference of parental involvement from one school, like for example in a public school in Astoria, Queens. One week I went to a school there and of 2,000 kids, and we had about 75 parents at the parenting workshop. And then I went to another school, I believe it was St. Joseph's in Long Island City. And the school had about 500 children in it, and we had about 500 parents there that night. The entire auditorium was packed. So the difference between a parochial and a public school, even back then, obviously a lot more involvement in a private or parochial school because the parents are paying money. It's usually a two-parent family, and there was a parent that would always be able to go to these meetings. You're dealing with the public school, tremendous drop-off. Not as many parents are involved on a daily basis. When parents are, a lot of times it's a single parent and they have to work, and they're unable to attend. So the public schools have a lot to catch up with regard to public parental involvement. And that was the purpose of the show back then, is to deliver hands-on techniques to parents to help them back then. Well, that's what we're trying to do now, but in a much bigger way. So the guests that I will have on will be salient. They'll hit the nerve of a lot of topics that we're facing today and a lot of challenges we're facing today. The schools are facing challenges like never before. Just adding on top of that, as we deliver this in the spring of 2024, there's roughly an additional 1 million children in the country that have come in across the border in the last 4 years that are about to create an enormous challenge for our public school systems around the country. And when I say that public school systems around the country, I literally mean every state, every public school system will have an influx of new alien immigrants into the classroom that will bring a whole new set of challenges that will really drain our system for the special needs and special ed like never before. The amount of language challenges that we'll bring in, and a lot of these kids have never been in a formalized school system before. So that, along with the hard time we're having filling our classrooms with enough teachers, qualified teachers. Since the pandemic, there's been a shortage of hiring teachers. And a lot of school districts challenged to put qualified people in, let alone people that deal with the kind of challenges that we see. So for the young teachers out there, this has got to be a tremendous challenge for them, especially not being equipped from your teaching days to deal with these problems. So, with our nation's reading and math scores at a 50-year low, our support, our focus will be on the million of children who have fallen behind. Their anxiety, depression. These are kids as young as 4 and 5 years old that are feeling this. I work with autistic kids, learning disabled kids, A and B students, B and C students, straight A students who are killing themselves and just dealing with an enormous amount of stress to maintain those A's. And while I've seen it all in the last 30 years, working with kids, hands-on, I've never seen the type of problems that are walking through the door today. They are layered on top of each other. I've never seen so many issues in the emotional areas, and that's affecting learning, affecting attitude, affecting their cognitive development. The amount of stress and learning is at an all-time high as far as what I'm seeing with kids, and at levels I've never seen before. Many of these children, as I said before, are dealing like someone with post-traumatic stress disorder. So with nearly 50 years experience, our goal is to take this information and deliver it for you to work directly with your children, or if you're a teacher listening to this, directly with your kids in the classroom, for unique ways to work around these problems and build their self-esteem, confidence, and turn these kids into lifetime learners. This is what I've been doing for the past 30 years hands-on, and it works in every single case when you can turn that child's attitude around, that you make learning easy and fun for them. And that's what you'll see with our program. So each week we'll roll up our sleeves and do a learning strategy based on brain-based learning techniques. It's not about understanding how to do it. It's about experiencing and applying the knowledge in real time in a meaningful way with practice that makes perfect for a lifetime. This is about permanent learning. When we teach you something, you'll learn it for a lifetime. So without any further ado, let's get into our workshop today, and it's on how the brain learns. And when it comes to learning, we do the exact opposite of what the school will do. When a school has a child who experiences learning, this could be an A student who has to be tutored for math to get that A. They really don't get math the first or second time around. It could be that B student that rushes through things. How they learn, okay, is the real problem there. Or children who have serious cognitive or sensory motor or visual issues and struggle with learning. What the school will do, what anybody will do, was chunk the information down and fragment it. If I have a learning disabled child, that child may be receiving 2, 3, 4 different services. They may be working with an OT, a PT, a speech and language person, a study group. Have an aide in the classroom to help them maintain focus and attention. At our center, we do the exact opposite. All right, we try to overwhelm the brain. We won't fragment it, give you a little piece at a time and try to correct it. We'll give you everything at once and expect you to learn it. So we're coming 3 levels below content teaching and tutoring. Now, what I want to point out when we talk about the 3 levels below content teaching and tutoring, I'm also referring to what encompasses all of it, your personal intelligence, your PI. You hear of AI today, artificial intelligence. This is PI. That's our focus, your personal intelligence. And this includes emotional intelligence. This includes communication skills, rapport skills. This includes a lot of areas that you would not think naturally as intelligence is. But let me tell you that your emotional intelligence, your communication intelligence, your personal intelligence is more important than any of the other intelligences you have. They incorporate all the intelligences. And when there are gaps in those intelligences, there'll be a gap in your personal intelligence. And it'll affect you some way in life. The most successful people in life are not the most intelligent people in life. They're not the ones with the 4.0 indexes. The most successful people in life are the ones that have the personal skills, the personal communication skills, a personal ability to interact, to achieve things on the outside, along with the intelligences. When you have both of those, nothing can stop you in life. I can't tell you how many 4.0 guys are not in upper management in companies because they lack the people skills. And how many people with the people skills that make it all the way to the top in companies, because that's the one thing that separates you from the masses when you have that fully developed. And we don't ignore that. We incorporate that in every part of our program. So let's start off with the basics, the foundational level. When we come 3 levels below, that foundational level is kind of multiple levels by itself. That's your sensory ability, all your senses, how they interact, how they deliver information to your brain. Your sensory motor, how you're able to act out, how you're able to write, play sports, walk, run, throw, catch, all the things, how to write, all right, that affect your ability to navigate life. Your visual skills, not just your eyesight. Eyesight's very important. Can't tell you how many times I screen a child and I find out I have to stop the screening because their eyesight is way off. They need glasses. So I'll send them out to an ophthalmologist, and have them come back after they get their glasses assessed. Then we work on also visual processing. That's the big one, okay? Visual processing, there are 6 muscles in each eye. How each muscle is developed and how they work together has an enormous impact on how you process information. How you read, how you focus, the attention to detail are all interacting with your visual skills. And I can't begin to tell you how important visual processing is for your brain. I discovered this myself more than 50 years ago, Back in the 1970s, I was a good student in school, but had to kill myself. I had to read things 2 or 3 times. Now, back at Manhattan College, I froze in my speech class in school. I actually withdrew from the course because I was frightened to death to get up in front of people. While I was still in college, I went to work for Grolier Publishing Company. They were going into classrooms around the country teaching library science lessons. Library science lessons were how to use the Dewey Decimal System, how to use the card catalog, how to use the Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature, and how to use an encyclopedia and dictionary. And by the way, the Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature, the encyclopedia, and the dictionary was the first internet as far as I was concerned. All the information you would need to do research were in those 3 areas. The card catalog brought us to the books, and the Dewey Decimal System, how the books were indexed, where they were located in the library. So we would go into a school from K through 8. I'd have an educational magic show I would do for the kindergartners in first grade on alphabetical order, right up to 7th, 8th grade on how to take notes and how to do a term paper. So that foundational piece for me at Grolier, going into the classrooms to overcome the fear I have of speaking in front of people, led me into this career I'm in today. While I was at Grolier, I would have to do a lot of reading. And I found myself having to read things 2 or 3 times to fully comprehend it. I went to a party and I ran into a developmental optometrist. And I told him about my experience and how it would exhaust me and how I would fall asleep at night reading. I explained to him that I would read a paragraph, and in the middle of the paragraph, I'd be daydreaming. Ever happened to anybody out there? Or read the whole paragraph, actually read it, and not understand what I just read. Have to go back and reread it again. So for me, it made a lot of sense when I went in to see him. He did a screening on me, and it turned out I had what was called a wall eye, which we would call today a lazy eye. Instead of both eyes coming in and conversion at near point, one eye would be looking at the wall. That would explain why I would look at a teacher in the front of the room and find myself daydreaming. Read a book, and in the middle of the book, be daydreaming. So for me, it made sense. I also had what he called an undershooting eye. When I would read across the page, many times I skip a word. I put a word in a sentence that wasn't there, and that word would either be above or below the sentence. Well, that's my eyes misdelivering information to the brain. So for me, I did vision training, and it took about 2 years, of course, a few thousand, which back then was a lot of money. But at 22, I think I maybe read 4 books for pleasure. Today, I read 2-3 books a week. For me, I read 2-3 newspapers a day. I can read 300 pages in a day and not have a problem. I can read 100 pages at night and not feel exhausted. Back in the day, if I'd read 20 pages, I'd have to take a break to read another 20 pages. If I picked a book up at night, I was asleep in 5 minutes. So the visual made an awful lot of sense to me. And for me, it changed my life. Now, back then, I thought that was the answer for everybody. You had focusing issues, reading comprehension issues. Hey, it's your eyes. You're losing your place, you're skipping words, you're daydreaming in the middle of a paragraph. You develop those muscles, bang, you're focused. Well, that wasn't true. Now, why? Because I was pretty good cognitive-wise, and I was very good sensory-motor-wise. But if you have problems in those areas and the visual area, your problems are going to be even worse. So I found out about sensory integration back then. Back when I found this out, there was not even OTs in the schools yet. That started in the early 80s. But addressing these underlying processing issues, these are the foundational abilities that are developed in the first 18 months of life. And our society today, we're doing everything possible to work against that. Crawling, for example, is a major integration point in the first 6 months of life. You know how many kids are walking at 4 or 5 months because of walkers? Or kids who don't crawl properly, they drag a leg? Crawling teaches the mind to cross its midline. When that doesn't happen, your 2 hemispheres don't fully integrate. And you don't develop near-point vision, near-point convergence. You don't develop a lot of other abilities, all right? Because your brain needs to work together. The more integrated it is, the better it is. When I say whole brain function, that's what you need for reading comprehension. When you read something, your analytical part of the brain decodes the words and gives the words meaning. Your creative part puts the words together, so you comprehend it as you read. Well, what happens, you could be an A student with this and have midline issues. When you have convergence issues or midline issues, your two hemispheres aren't working together, a lot of stress will take place when it comes to reading. So when you have this stress when it comes to reading, what will happen? You'll trance out, you'll daydream, you'll read a sentence, understand every word in the sentence, but not understand the meaning of the sentence. That's because the moment you start to read and your eyes aren't working properly, your cortisol levels go up. The moment your cortisol levels go up, all the blood in the frontal lobe rushes back to the brain stem, fight or flight. That's where the information that you know you can't access because you're too stressed. There's no oxygen in the frontal lobes. Your neurotransmitters can't fire off. As a result, and by the way, this is the same thing that happens when you're taking a test. And you know the answers, you studied hard. But all of a sudden, you're taking that test, you're stressed out, and some kid's humming away next to you. So all of a sudden, you're looking over, you're bothered by that, and you can't remember the answer to that question. The test is over, you hand it in, you walk out the door, and bang, that information comes right back to you. Why? Well, what happened was the stress is over. The blood came back, and your brain operated properly. I'll have a whole series of episodes just on how to reduce stress and how to take a test. When you can do that and learn how to control your stress during stressful situations, you will not believe the change in your recall and your brain's ability to attend to detail. So that by itself can have an enormous impact on you. But back to the stress and how it just destroys learning, recall, and retention. So our goal in looking at these different underlying abilities in the sensory and visual area, we combine that together. All right, when we look at sensory motor learning, that's visual processing and sensory integration. We combine our exercises together. When we do a screening, we measure the 13 perceptual abilities everyone needs to be developed in to be an effective and stress-free learner. Now, you could be a straight A student and have some of those abilities or all of those abilities underdeveloped. All that's going to mean is you have to kill yourself to be that A student. I once had a Harvard Law School graduate take the program. She was number one in her class. When I screened her, probably the worst eyes I've ever screened. She was taking in school 10 hours a night to study. She had to put everything on index cards. And in law, there were different topics, so she had a different index cards and different shoe boxes for state law, for whatever the particular law is, the area of law. She had to separate them out and put them on index cards. And what does she pick but contract law to go into? Her worst area. She read with an index card because she would always lose a place, skip lines or words. And she felt that contract law would be best for her because she had so much stress when it came to learning. Well, when I saw her, she was in her mid-30s, and she was taking about 80 hours a week to do her job at work. Came to me, took a couple of years, and I say, worst eyes I've ever seen. Doesn't matter, child or adult. And she was working with kids a lot of time. And she couldn't do the exercises these little guys were doing. So she came in, and was every week she'd come once a week and do exercises at home. It took her about 2 years to complete the program. Her eyes fully converged at the end. She had no convergence when she came in. She had an enormous dip in her eyes. Her ocular pursuit, tracking space and time, major refixations. Well, I actually sent her out to a developmental optometrist. Let me pause here. When I do a screening, we check to see if there's a suppressed eye. You have a chart and red-green glasses. If you put these glasses on, your eyes are working fine. You look at them, the chart is fine. You can read it perfectly. You flip the glasses upside down, it looks the same. Yeah, no problem. Well, when you put these on and your eyes aren't working evenly, what you'll see is like a 3D, or you see one, you don't see the other. You flip them over, you see the other, but you don't now see the other. So that, whether an eye is suppressed or not, means that when you put those glasses on, half of the chart is dark. You don't see it. You flip it over, now the other half is dark. Because the glasses were flipped over, the eye is on the color is on a different eye. I have to stop the screening and refer those people out to a developmental optometrist because they may need something else I don't know. All right. So, and by the way, obviously you should always see an ophthalmologist when you have a young child, and an optometrist you should see every couple of years to make sure the eyesight is good. At least once in a lifetime, you should, when the child is at least 4 or 5 and they're struggling with reading or attention or behavior, you should see a developmental optometrist to see if there are any visual processing issues. Not the eyesight, but how well those muscles are developed. So in our screening, we'll measure those 13 perceptual abilities. I will have the parents right behind me, watching what I'm watching. And if the child has any issue, you physically see it during the screening. And once you see what the child's going through, you instantly understand that that child is pumping out a ton of energy to do this work. They may very well, even though they might be failing in school or struggling or have a behavioral problem, they may be doing the best they can with what they have to work with. And if you're there, that parent, becoming very frustrated, very angry at your child, you may be doing lifetime damage. Now, let me stop here and just clarify one thing. Have you ever heard the 80-20 rule? All right? The old 80-20 rule. We spend 20% of the time on things that are important and 80% of the time on the things that are not. When it comes to parenting, of course, you want that reversed. When it comes to parenting, the 80-20 rule means you praise your child 80% of the time. You discipline them 20. All right, that's important. Why? Because if you discipline them 80% of the time and praise them 20, you'll destroy their self-esteem and self-confidence. If you praise your child 100% of the time, you may be doing lifetime damage. You may be creating a monster with no boundaries. All right, that 20% discipline is needed for all children. Those are the non-negotiables, having to do with safety and behavior and public and things like that. You separate them out. And your job as a parent, after that 20%, is to catch your kid doing something right, is to praise them as much as you can. Now, not every kid is an 80-20 kid. All right, so there are kids out there you're going to have to discipline more. It should never be more than 50%. You shouldn't be disciplining your child more than you're praising them. Well, Peter, my child, you don't know what he's like from morning to... Trust me, there are tons of things you can catch them doing something right. When a child makes a parent mad, this is the big danger in parenting. That parent stays mad the entire day. What you need to do is learn how to get rid of that anger in the moment. Once you express yourself, you go and catch them doing something right away. Well, you're going to see a big difference. A lot of parents today, they discipline their kids so much that child looks for attention by getting disciplined. They'll seek out that behavior. Whatever you give to them all the time, they're going to go after it because they want the attention from you, good or bad. It's not conscious. This is all unconscious. Now, what happens when you discipline your child and then moments later you find them doing something right, something good? All right? What that child in the moment does is say, wait a minute. If I act this way, this is the way my mom treats me. If I act this way, this is the way they treat me. I like this better than this. I'm going to do this more than this. And that's what happens. So when I'm working with a kid, I can get angry at them and redirect them. 2 minutes later, I'm saying, wow, what a great job. That kid gets confused because I was just mad at them. No, they don't. They start acting more this way to get more of that kind of attention from me. And that's something you can learn. It's easy to do. You got to look at yourself in the mirror. I'll date back to the 90s. I'll never forget this call. It was a clinic about how to work with your child with homework. It was a homework clinic. And the parent would say, called me up and say, it turns into a yelling, screaming match every single night. I don't know what to do anymore. She says, I try to do the things you tell me, and I watch my words, I control myself. And I said, I have a advice for you. I said, why don't you film yourself when you're working with your child? All right, put it on the background. Don't let her know that it's on. And then later on, take a look at how you work with your child. Well, I didn't hear from her the following week. 2 weeks later, she called back, and she was on the phone with me saying, I'm almost ashamed to call you back to tell you this. She said, I didn't call you last week. I was too ashamed. I did that, exactly what you're saying. I worked for my child for 45 minutes, and it turned into a yelling, screaming match again. When I sat back later that night by myself, I cried when I looked at that. I couldn't believe how nasty I was. I would never let a stranger talk to my child that way, and I knew the camera was on, and I thought I was acting in a way, just responding to my child's reaction. All right, for me, it was an eye-opener. I couldn't believe the way I acted, and I had control. I chose not to do it. So just a simple example like that shows the amount of power you have as a parent and how you can change your child's life effectively by watching your physiology, your tonality, and the way you speak to your child. You may be using all the right words, but non-verbally, 93% is physiology and tonality. 7% is words. Remember when you were a child and your father called your name? You knew from the tone of his voice what was going to happen. You knew from a facial expression whether you were going to get hugged or hit, okay, as a child. Your mom, you knew by her attitude what was going to happen. These are all intangible things we teach to our kids, nonverbal. When you start watching how you use your body, how you use your tone, and you adjust that, you'll immediately see your child adjusting for that. So we'll screen the child in these 13 perceptual abilities. I always tell the parents to bring a sibling. So now they have a comparison. They see one kid can converge, they're out, and the other one can't. Well, they see one kid getting A's and B's and the other one getting C's and D's. And now they have an answer for that. I can't tell you how many twins I've had screening, where one twin would be just, his eyes and his sensory motor were just completely underdeveloped, and the other one fully developed. And it fully explained that. Or, I can't tell you how many times I've seen twins, and they had the same exact issue. But one kid's getting A's, the other one's getting C's and D's. What was the difference? Well, that was where the emotional intelligence came in. One would get those A's because they would stick with it until they got it right, and the other one, at the first sign of getting it over with, they would do it and take the path of least resistance, right or wrong, to stop having to do work. That's emotional intelligence. You can't buy that. You know by the time your child is 2 what their attitude's going to be, whether they're going to work through something or work around it. So those exercises that we do to correct that, it's the same for everybody. There are 13 perceptual abilities. There's roughly 26 different exercises in 5 different categories that they will do to fully correct that. So if a child comes in with a lazy eye, or a child comes in with severe undershoots or refixations in their eyes, we correct all that. And at the end, we do a rescreening, and you'll see everything fully corrected. And we're making a direct correlation. When you have those abilities, you'll focus better, attend better, comprehend better, perform better in every aspect of life. And by the way, a byproduct of the sensory motor and the visual training you'll go through is athletically, the kids go through the ceiling. I have kids who come in, and for the academics, and then they'll see things in the athletics that you wouldn't believe. I have parents putting their other siblings in for the athletic reasons. Now, by the way, I do get a lot of siblings do the program, especially A students, siblings, who come in who have a lazy eye or wall eye, and they're killing themselves. So for them, it's quality of life. If they can do their work in half the times and get even better grades, this is something that can enhance the quality of life for somebody. So that's the foundational piece. And there's physical exercises they would do in the gym to correct all of it. Now, above that is cognitive. These are brain functions. All right, we work with the 41 abilities, 27 abilities, 17 abilities, depending on the cognitive program we're using at the time. Now, my original work in cognitive development began in the 80s. I worked and studied the work of J.P. Guilford. J.P. Guilford was a psychologist from the 1940s. He worked with the Army Air Corps, pilots and navigators. So he found that there was a dropout rate of 37% in the Army Air Corps, which is way too much investment in training to have these guys drop out 11 weeks later. What he did was work with the very best fighter pilots and found that there was 7 cognitive abilities, individual functions of the brain that they doubted. Let me take a moment and just, I can't reach for this, and explain what a cognitive ability is, an individual function for the brain. So, for example, in Guilford's model, there are 11 abilities necessary to be a good architect. All right, so for mathematics, there are 11, to be good at math, 11 abilities to be good at it. So I'll take one of them, something called CFT, cognition of figural transformation. That's being able to see an object, this piece of plastic in space and time. Now, my ability in my brain to manipulate it, see it from different angles, is a cognitive function. If I'm good at that, I'll be able to understand angles, area, and space when the teacher's teaching it. If I happen to be poor at this ability, I may have a difficult time conceptualizing a geometry teacher teaching angles, area, and space to me. So as opposed to, if someone comes to me poor at geometry, as opposed to tutoring them in geometry, giving them more of what they can't do, we work on that ability called CFT, cognition of figural transformations, seeing objects and being able to manipulate them. These modules may be taking an object and seeing it quarter turn, half turn, three-quarter turns, flipped over, flipped upside down. So now I'm manipulating something in my mind and seeing it different ways. As I go through that training, I'm actually training in angles, area, and space that I'll need to learn for geometry. So now a teacher teaches, when I have that ability developed, I can conceptualize and understand what they're saying. So when I first started, we worked with J.P. Guilford and Dr. Mary Meeker and Dr. Bob Meeker. They have a company called Structure of Intellect that I started working with in the early 1990s. So back then, I worked for Grolier Publishing for 15 years. I came in because I froze in my speech class in college, and I went into the company to overcome the fear I had of speaking in front of people. Well, once I overcame that fear, I stayed with the company. And for the next 15 years, I became the youngest vice president in history. I also went into the sales division, which I became their International Salesman of the Year. I won every major award for the company. I was a branch manager, senior VP for the company at the age of 27. And in 1984, Grolier was bought out by a company called Hachette. And they took over Grolier. I left Grolier. And over those years at Grolier, I developed 140 hours of training programs, which I took with me, which is at the basis of my learning strategies today. Over the time at Grolier, I developed workshops working with Project Zero, which was a think tank for Harvard on multiple intelligences. I worked directly with Bruce Torff, director of the center, became a good friend of mine. We delivered workshops together, developed some things together. Very bright guy. And this led me to the work of Dr. Mary Meeker and Dr. Bob Meeker. Now, Mary Meeker was a psychologist, and Bob Meeker was an industrial psychologist. Together, they set up mom and pop clinics around the country, about 25 of them, psychologists who delivered the program. Mary Meeker was Guilford's graduate student. Together, they developed an assessment for academic performance called the SOI, Structure of Intellect. This measured the 26 mental abilities necessary to be a good student. Now, Mary Meeker didn't stop there. She didn't stop with measurements. Guilford was a measurements guy. So he continued to work for the Defense Department and came up with models for every job out there. You want to be a police officer, an FBI agent, an engineer, an accountant, a designer. Didn't matter what it is, he would tell you what cognitive abilities you needed to be good at that career. So let's say you wanted to be an architect, and there are 11 abilities to be a great architect. And you were good at 3 and poor at 8. Guilford would tell you to find another career. You'll never be a good architect. Well, Dr. Mary Meeker didn't stop there. Well, she said, well, what is it that we can do to develop those 8 underdeveloped abilities? So now you're developed in all 11 areas. So if you want to be an architect, you could be an architect. And that's what she did. She developed modules for academics for all 27 areas that if you're poor at them, 11 for math, the rest for memory, for comprehension, for reading, that you can become developed in all 27 of those areas. So she developed measurements for learning styles, comprehension, reading, math. And once we had a profile, we know what areas to attack and develop. So Dr. Mary Meeker and Dr. Bob Meeker had the program called SOI. A gentleman named Bill Brock, former senator, Secretary of Labor, Republican National Chairman, was somebody who acquired the rights with the Meekers, and I went to work with him trying to sell this to school systems around the country. Over the course of the next 10 years, they were able to put this into 660 school systems in 27 states. So we took the bottom 2,000 students in the Wichita, Kansas City school system. And these are the bottom 2,000 high school students. And 97% of the kids had improved at least one grade level in their reading and math scores. I took a film crew out and interviewed the superintendent, the teachers, the principals, and the students. And across the board, they've never seen anything like this as far as a mass results by going through this program. And that kind of leapfrogged a company called Bridges, where Bill Brock was the owner of the Meeker's technology to bring it out to school systems. He put it over the years into 660 school systems in 27 states. In every school that we put it in, we saw an enormous improvement for the students who went through the program. But like everything else, it's political, and a new superintendent would come in, and the next thing you know, the program would be out. I know in New York, I had put this into a public school in the South Bronx, MS 201 in Hunts Point, and we had incredible results with the 7th grade class we gave it to. And the next year, we lost our space because of the population of the school went up and they needed our room. And the program was canceled, even though they'd never seen any improvement like this before. So this is the challenges you face when you have something out of the box. And even though it works, someone new coming in, new superintendent, will bring their own programs in. So there's nothing uniform nationally that we can attack these problems and see the results where everyone wants to utilize the same type of technology or the same type of technique to work with these kids. Again, it's fragmented. It's all different ways, all different means to deal with these kids that have the issues out there. And forget about the students that struggle, that don't fall below that line of getting services. There's a whole group of kids that are not learning how to read or math on grade level that don't qualify for services and are just falling by the wayside, that are graduating from high school and not being able to read properly. What I experienced back in the 1990s, that most colleges had remedial reading and math programs for the new students coming in. Like, can you imagine that? Remedial reading and math? In the 1990s, Herman Badillo, former congressman who authored the bilingual laws, by the way, in education in the 1960s, he was a deputy mayor and then became president of the New York University. If someone couldn't read on grade level, in other words, they were on like a 5th grade reading level or 5th grade math level, they could still go to college. And colleges were forced to have like learning centers to train the students in reading and writing, what they should have learned in middle school. Well, he ended that. And the enrollments actually went up in school, and the graduations shot up in the school because that became a requirement. I got some bad news for us today. We're back to these learning centers, putting them in because students are coming in unprepared to on grade level to read or on grade level with math. And they have now reinstituted these teacher training centers in our school. So the cognitive work that the Meekers did, the cognitive work that Jim Fadigan did, and I also ran in recently to a program, recently the last 10 years, called Brainware, which covers 41 individual cognitive abilities. There are tons of other cognitive training programs out there, but I want to distinguish between these three. The Brainware program, developing 41 individual cognitive abilities. The structure of intellect works on 27 abilities, and the Learn to Learn program, which is 17 abilities. These are programs that are based on tons of research and have shown incredible results. There are other cognitive training programs that have done quite well, especially Alzheimer's and dementia, helping people with those types of issues. But the cognitive development of a child and getting this developed before they get into high school or college can have an enormous impact on their experience in education. I don't know how many kids I see when they're in their 20s or teens or even adults that if I had caught them in 2nd or 3rd grade and corrected the processing issues and developed the cognitive skills, they would have had a whole different experience with education and learning. So that's what the cognitive program could do. We work on those abilities. At the same time, we're working on the sensory motor and the visual. Now, the final thing we do is the learning strategies, and that's my area of research, brain-based learning, neuroscience, how the best learners learn, how to visualize, memorize, study for a test, take a test, read for meaning. Now, we teach, and it doesn't matter what the content is, but what we do at our centers is we have a set group of content that we teach that I think should be the foundational knowledge that everyone on the planet should know. What do we teach? We teach every country of the world, every population of every country, every bone of the body, the first 50 elements of the periodic tables. We teach them the planets, the distances from the sun, the amount of moons each planet has, which changes yearly, by the way, for Jupiter and Saturn. We'll teach everything from the preamble to the Constitution to the Declaration of Independence. So what we're really teaching is whatever information is put in front of you, this is how you chunk it, This is how you hold your body. This is how you visualize it. This is how you send it to long-term memory. We're going to have a spelling clinic at the end of our program, of this session today. That spelling clinic will go into how to become a great speller. And if you just practice the technique, within weeks, you'll be able to memorize a dozen words in 5 minutes, spell them frontwards and backwards, and never forget the spelling of those words. And that's true for everything. This is about permanent learning. So when you come to us, we hit your brain really 4 different ways: sensory motor, visual, cognitive, and then learning strategies. And you come to us, it's done in an hour and a half hour in the gym, correcting the visual and sensory together, a half hour in the cognitive room, and a half hour in the learning strategies. We don't group by age or ability. Now, in that gym, we train your brain to detail on focus and attention, working the sensory and visual at the same time. You'll be using balance boards, trampolines, walking boards, bean bags. There'll be auditory, there'll be visual in there, but there'll also be chaos in there. We train you how to focus with chaos around you. Movement, sounds, noises, that's by design. The more crowded the gym is, the better experience it is for you to focus and attend. We deliberately try to distract you as we get you to focus on detail. Now, that's a little different than most training programs, but it gets incredible results. Then right after that, you go into cognitive training. You could be working on a computer and paper and pencil, or both together. Now, as you work on these cognitive abilities, there may be confusion around there also. You're expected to focus and attend on your task at hand. And then learning strategies. We may learn the first 20 presidents of the United States. We may learn the Central America. We may learn South America. When we're done with that, we take out a stopwatch and we see how fast you can get it out. And by the way, as part of a training program with students and adults, if you can give me the presidents in less than 15 seconds, I will pay you $100. If you can give me the states, all of the states in less than 20 seconds, I'll give you $100. The first 50 elements in less than 20 seconds, I'll pay you $100. Africa in less than 20 seconds, and I'll pay you $100. We have kids as young as first grade, and occasionally we get an adult to do it. But these kids, it is unbelievable. Special needs, A student, you couldn't tell the difference when they're doing the learning strategies. Again, we don't group by age or ability. So in that room, I may have an 8th grader, I may have a 2nd grader, I may have a college student. That 2nd grader may be the fastest of the group. But what you see is they keep trying to beat their score, their speed, and you see intuitive knowledge take place. So when you look at, let's say, Central America, I know there's Belize, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Panama. I can non-linear tell you Belize is about 400,000 people, where Guatemala is about 18, 19 million people. Honduras is about 10 million people. Panama is about 4.5 million people. I can jump down South America and tell you Brazil has about 220 million now. But it doesn't matter where in the world, nonlinear, I can tell you where it is. If we teach you the presidents, you'll know Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, Adams, or backwards, you'll be able to give it to us. Or nonlinear, tell us the 35th president was Kennedy, the 10th was Tyler, the 18th was Grant, the 16th was Lincoln. Nonlinear access to the information. So when you come to us, you're going through all 3, well, you could say 4 with visual and sensory motor, parts at the same time. It's different. If you came to us on Monday and did the gym exercises, came to Tuesday and did the cognitive work, and came Wednesday and did the learning strategies, it's not the same thing. Doing one after the other does something to the brain holistically. Brain doesn't learn in little pieces. The brain always learns as one. And we deliver everything at once. It is amazing the quantum leaps the brain will go to. We call this brain plasticity. All right, you're able to adapt almost immediately. You see immediate change. By the way, the speed stuff changes the whole function of the brain. We have neurochemicals creating the memories and the connections and the transfer of information from working to long term. When we talk about the electrical part of this, that's where the speed stuff comes in. That's wiring. That's chunking. The conscious mind can only process 2 to 7 chunks. With the speed, I call it brain aerobics. You can chunk things. The United States becomes one chunk of information. I could do it in one breath. The presidents become one chunk. The elements, a couple of chunks, because there's 118 of them. Doesn't matter what the content is. The brain doesn't know the difference between a letter, a number, a word, a phrase. It's your emotional attitude towards a topic or a subject. And what we aim to do with the learning strategies is make it so that it doesn't matter what the content is. If I can teach you the preamble to the Constitution, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish in chunks like that. So you know the 8th chunk is do, ordain, and establish. The 2nd chunk is in order to form a more perfect union. I can give you that 52-word preamble frontwards or backwards, doesn't matter, chunk by chunk. Then you're going to have no problem memorizing a poem, a speech, or something else you have to memorize. So we hit this brain all 3 ways. I'll have parents come to me and say, when's the best time to bring them? Right after school, they're exhausted. I'll say, that's the best time. Drop them off then. We'll drag them through the program. When the parent picks them up, they're wide awake. Because we didn't put their minds to sleep like school or doing schoolwork does. We've awakened their brain. We've awakened their minds through the techniques and the development of working at all of this at once. And that's how the brain learns. So when you're dealing with this emotionally, you all of a sudden have confidence and self-esteem that you never had before because you're accomplishing things you've never done before. So that's the breakdown of the personal intelligence model, with the emotional intelligence really, to me, as the most important aspect of it. So before we get into the actual details of our spelling clinic, I'd like to take this opportunity to give you a complete overview of the foundational abilities needed to execute our learning strategies. This will be for the learning strategies today and our future learning strategies we'll be teaching you moving forward in the podcast. They all require the same abilities, all right? The same things I'm going to go over now. Each time you engage information, you engage it in a totally resourceful physiology and mentality. Information is just information. The conscious mind can only chunk 2 to 7 chunks of information at a time. The conscious mind can only look at information and relate it to past learning. So how you approach information has a lot to do with your attitude. The information is black and white. The informations are letters and numbers. To the mind, knows no difference between a letter, a number, a phrase. To the brain, it's an electrical chemical response. And if you follow the directions we're going to give today, the content is meaningless. It could be science, it could be math, it could be history. It doesn't matter. It's an electrical chemical response in the brain. So if you know how the brain operates, if you know what to do with information, regardless of what it is, how to chunk it, how to look up, how to visualize it, how to memorize it, how to send it to long-term memory, there isn't anything you can't learn, whether it's languages, advanced mathematics, advanced science, history, and so on. So, what is the number one requirement before we start anything? Attitude. Your attitude is the key to everything in life. Every day that you get up, you determine what your attitude is. It doesn't matter what happens during that day. It's how you respond to something and how you will let it affect your attitude. There are kids who have great attitudes all day long. They let nothing destroy their attitudes. And there are others that the moment something happens to them, their day is ruined. So it's very important that you take control of your life, that you take control of your attitude every day and think about it. Now, I learned this many, many years ago. I hate to tell you how many years ago. I was a big self-help person back in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. Listened to a ton of tapes and videos and so on. One of my favorites was one of the founders of the self-help industry, a guy named Earl Nightingale. And he had a whole program on attitude. Now, I thought it was so important that attitude played in everything that I did that I created a little sign that I put on my mirror in my bathroom. And every morning, that's the first thing I looked at, was that little strip that said attitude. And I knew I needed to control my attitude that day. On the worst days, I made sure I had the best attitude. And as a learner, you do that, there is nothing that's going to stop you. So your attitude is critical. Your attitude determines a lot of things, by the way. How you hold your body, how you think, how you place your eyes, how you chunk information, how you perceive it. It is everything when you have control over your attitude. When you don't, you're a victim. Things happen to you. You get thrown off track. You're distracted. You're not engaged. Right? So how you hold your body, where you place your eyes, how you chunk information has a direct correlation whether it goes to working memory or to long term. Let me pause for a minute and talk about memories. You have three memories. You have short term, where information is constantly coming in and out and you're gauging it. Whether it's a wind or the sun or a noise or a car horn, doesn't matter where it comes from, what it is, your body registers all of it. What you pay attention to is different. So how that information comes into you, if you're not prepared to learn it, if you're not in a resourceful physiology, it may go to working memory, but it's not going to go to long-term memory. So you have short-term. You have working memory. That stuff your teacher may be teaching right now, or working, or you're reading, or you're doing homework, or you're doing stuff for business. And that information's in your working memory. What you want it to be is in your long-term memory with instant recall. And there are two major things that must happen for information to go from working memory to long-term to have instant recall. First, you have to make sense of it. You have to understand it. If you don't understand it, there's no way you can transfer it to long-term memory. So once you understand it, that's the first key. The second thing is to assign meaning to it. That guarantees transfer to long-term memory. Now, what do I mean by assigning meaning? Whenever you learn something new, if you can attach it to something previously learned, that's called transfer, by the way, it will automatically send things to long-term memory. Most of the time when students are studying subjects they're not interested in or just memorizing through rote memory, they can memorize information enough so it's in working memory. Now, what happens when it's in working memory? It'll stay there from anywhere from 24 to 48 hours. And if it doesn't assign meaning, the mind will discard most of that information. However, if transfer takes place, you attach it to something previously learned, you will permanently learn that information. You'll have instant recall of that information. So those are the two things that must happen. What's happening today is most students are only learning to understanding it. They're not assigning meaning. They're going through rote memory. They may get a good mark on a test, but a week later, most of that information is gone. Matter of fact, there's been tons of studies done where they tested kids during test day and then retested them a week later without telling them and gave them the same exact test. And almost every situation, you had anywhere from 50 to a 60% drop-off from their scores. And these are kids who were getting 90s and 80s that when given the same test a week later were getting 60s, 50s, and 40s on that same test. So that mind will not assign information meaning. You will lose a lot of that information. So that's the second part. That's why it's so important to understand when we go through the first one, the spelling clinic, which is all visual, that the key is to memorizing information is that how you hold your body, how you chunk it, and how you see it in your mind's eye. And everything that we do in our learning strategies, we do frontwards and we do backwards. Now, why would you go over something backwards? That's to guarantee that you're seeing it in your mind's eye. Now, as you do this, there are 4 levels of development for anything that you do. And I can generally say the majority of the children in school today, the majority of our students in this country, learn to working memory, not to long-term memory. The majority of our kids are just memorizing stuff to pass a test, not truly learning it. So that's the challenge that you have. All right. So, and what ends up happening when they only learn it to working memory, they become consciously competent at working. Consciously competent means it takes all your conscious energy to perform that task. So learning becomes exhausting. Reading becomes exhausting. Studying becomes exhausting. So the 4 levels of development, the first is unconscious incompetence. If you're sitting here today and never heard of my spelling clinic, you have unconscious incompetence. You don't know something. You don't know my techniques. Now, once I explain them to you, you'll understand them, you'll comprehend them, but still not be competent at it. So that's called that's called conscious incompetence. Then you get to the conscious competence level, where most of you are now with learning. This is something like riding a bicycle. Your first time probably was disastrous. you felt like you were going to fall and had no control over riding that bicycle. Well, if I'm talking to an adult now, the first time you drove a car, you got behind that wheel, you felt like you were flying off the road. Then you got comfortable with it. You got consciously competent with it. Now it took all your conscious energy to ride that bicycle, to drive that car, looking all around at everything. Well, the next level is unconscious competence. That's where your unconscious mind takes care of anything. For those parents and adults that drive cars, you know the first time you drove a car, how difficult it was. Now you probably get home late at night after going out all night, and you don't know how you got home, but you got there. Your unconscious mind took care of it. If you're a child or an adult that rides a bicycle and you went the whole winter without riding the bicycle and someone brought a bicycle out, that's hardwired into you now. You're unconsciously competent at it. So you jump on that bicycle after 8 months of not riding it and have no problem riding it around. That's where you want to get to learning, unconscious competence. So in the beginning of everything I'm going to teach you, it may seem difficult, the little tasks that we do, and then the speed in which we do it. But as you become unconsciously competent, it's a difference of taking half an hour to learn 10 words and then taking 5 minutes when you become unconsciously competent to learn it. You will reduce your speed of learning to minutes, where in the past it may have taken hours to learn that same information. So as we go through the learning strategies in this podcast, you're going to have the opportunity to learn what everyone learns in our center. You will learn spelling technique that we're going to do today. You'll learn all the presidents, all the countries of the world, all the populations of the countries, bones of the body, the first 50 elements of the periodic tables, content regarding poems. For example, learning the preamble to the Constitution is the same strategy to memorizing poems or speeches. We'll teach you that chunking information. You'll be able to memorize or learn information that you never thought yourself being capable of learning. Now, this also applies to languages, applies to writing, applies to all types of creativity. You'll understand what this all means as you learn these different techniques in our learning strategies component. So, and also another part of this is where you study, how you set yourself up for success or failure. So that number one area is physiology, all right, how you hold your body. The number two area is something called eye accessing cues. Where you place your eyes determines what part of the brain you access at any given moment. A key component of learning our learning strategies is using your mind's eye to visualize the information. Once you fully engage that information and visualize it in your mind's eye, it becomes a real thing for your memory. It becomes something for your memory to latch onto and to add more information to. Again, transfer. That's what we want to accomplish. That once you learn something that's permanent, it becomes much easier to learn new information when you can attach it to previously learned information. So where you place your eyes. If you're right-handed, this is a scenario. If I look up to my left, I'm accessing my visual memory. If I look up to my right, I'm accessing visual constructive. I'm creating new pictures in my mind. If I look to my left ear, auditory memory, remembering sounds, words to a song, something somebody said to me. Looking to my right ear, I may be lying, I may be paraphrasing, I may be making up new words to a song. If I look down to my left, I'm in internal dialogue. If I look straight down or down to my right, I'm in emotions and feelings. Now, if you're a teacher or a parent working with a child, you watch how they process information. And when they're good at something and they have to retrieve information or learn something and they like the topic, their eyes will automatically go up. Every great learner, the moment you ask them a question, they have to retrieve information, their eyes go up. Now watch your child who's struggling, either in a subject that they do poorly in or in general that they're struggling with. Their eyes will always be down. They'll always be talking to themselves, which will be negative, or have negative emotions and feelings. The most resourceful physiology is the eyes to be up to recall information. Just by changing where the eyes are during a learning episode or a retrieval episode will greatly enhance transfer from long-term to working memory or working memory to long-term. If you're a teacher, watch your class. Watch when they answer questions. Watch when the students who know the information where their eyes are, when you call on kids who struggle, where their eyes go. And if you can get those kids to look up and see the information, you're gonna be shocked by how many times they can retrieve the information. Where if you just let them go to their own device, they'll have a hard time recalling it. And a lot of that time is just confidence. And by the way, just as a sidebar, when you look up, you cannot access emotions and feelings. You want to stop a baby from crying? If the baby's crying, get the baby to look up. Within seconds, the baby will stop crying. If you can keep the eyes up, they will continue to stop crying. If you let them come down, they may start crying again. But this works for everyone, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, adults. If you ever see at a funeral where someone doesn't want to cry, they'll be holding their eyes up to stop crying. That's because it's unconsciously we know if we put our eyes up, we disattach from emotion and we're into visual. For learning, it's everything. To see that information frontwards and backwards. The places you study as a key thing. Everything's multitasking today. Every kid is studying with phones and computers and iPads, and this is not the way to learn. As I said previously, there's an enormous drop-off in comprehension when you read things off a tablet or a computer or a phone as opposed to something in print. So whenever you can, I know it's hard today with everything on computer, use print to study and to read from. When you have to, you use the computer, but be aware of it. Use the other techniques that we're teaching you here today. So at best, if you have control and you're a good student, you want to make sure you're in a quiet environment. You don't want the computer, TV, an iPad on. You don't want messages coming in from your friends while you're studying. You want to block time away for total dedication to study. You're taking 3-4 hours a night to study. Half of that time is just wasted answering text or looking at things on TikTok or computers, or isolate yourself. Get the work done, making it meaningful. Anytime you develop habits like this, they last for a lifetime. If you want to separate yourself from the masses, you acquire these skills at a young age and you use it for the rest of your life. So think of your study areas. Think of the devices you have around you and isolate them and isolate yourself. So, you look at just any sport out there, any professional that does anything. There's an exact method that they use. That exact method how they hold their body. If it's a baseball player, they don't change their stance in the batter's box every time they go into the batter's box. They have the identical stance every single time. And as a student, you want the same approach to learning, having an identical approach every single time. And if, like in our learning strategies, you have a universal approach that can be applied to any subject matter at all, you want to become unconsciously competent at it. Okay, so that batter in the batter's box is going to bat the same way every time unless he decides to hit the ball to right field because his runners on second and third and he wants to advance them. So he may adjust himself a little bit. So there's always a little bit of adjustment for certain situations, and I'll go over that at another clinic. So every single time that I study, I use the exact techniques that I used the very first time that I learned them. I am conscious of how I'm holding my body. I am conscious of where I place my eyes. I am conscious of how I chunk the information in 2 to 7 chunks. Now, if we learn, let's say, the United States in 2 to 7 chunks, we would do it chunk by chunk by chunk. So if I had the first chunk of the United States, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, I'd learn it frontwards and I learned it backwards. Rhode Island, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine. And then I'd speed it up. Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine. And I repeat it over and over again. Then I make that 2 to 7 chunks into 1 chunk of information. I go on to the next chunk, and it's the same thing. We're going to do the same thing with spelling today. It's just letters. It's simple, and it doesn't matter the size or the meaning of the word. It's just a bunch of letters you're going to learn frontwards and backwards, and we'll demonstrate with that with some children today. So as we start the spelling clinic, very important that spelling is purely a visual technique. The best spellers in the world are visual spellers. The students that struggle the most with spelling are phonetic spellers. They sound the words out. Well, with the English language, you have 20% of the words you cannot phonetically spell. Now, if we add in our new computer language, there's a ton more that we can't spell. All right, so you want to rely on visualization, visually seeing the information. So when I speak about unconscious learning to the unconscious competent level and being fully engaged in the information, you're not just learning a technique, all right, and becoming unconsciously competent at it. You're fully engaging information when it's presented to you. When students come to our center, the content doesn't matter. What we teach them in a given day is not strictly organized into chunks based on the content. So we may be learning the United States one day and quickly switch off to the presidents without completing the United States. Come back to that another day to complete it. Because we're not teaching them content. We're teaching them whatever's put in front of you. This is what you do with the information. This is how you chunk it. This is how you visualize it. And this is how you send it to long-term memory. So today, that's what we're going to do with spelling. Okay, so you may ask the question, so Peter, why do we do the speed? Well, there's two things that happen in the brain. There's a electrical chemical response. The chemicals are the neurotransmitters in the brain. Those are the connections between the synapses. We're born with 100 million brain cells. Each individual brain cells could have 40,000 synapses. I don't know if anybody wants to do the math, but 40,000 times 100 million. You know, the amount of trillions we're talking about here. So this is powerful stuff when you look at what we're doing with our brains and how powerful our brains really are. The emotion that's involved has an enormous impact on what we use in our brain. So again, a poor attitude will get poor results, a good attitude will get good results, an excellent attitude will get excellent results. And so when we look at a spelling word, what we first do is chunk it out. Again, the conscious mind can only process 2 to 7 chunks, depending on the age of a student. They may only have a chunking capacity of 3 or 4. They have not gotten up to 7 or 8 yet. All right, so when you get to that child's capacity, that's what you would chunk it in. And a word like Albuquerque, if I'm working with a young student, I would chunk it into 3, maybe 4 chunks. The reason why I pick Albuquerque, the capital of New Mexico, is because phonetically you cannot spell that word. That word is spelled Albuquerque. A little weird spelling there, especially for young kids. But now let's separate the word. If I separate it into ALBU, I would have the students look up and in skywrite, look up to their right and write ALBU. As you're looking at it, the ALBU, read it to me backwards, UBLA. Now, once I have that down, I go to the next chunk. Next chunk is QUER, and I want you to look up, see that word, right? QUER, and now backwards, REUQ. Now I'll have them go over the first 2 chunks. ALBUQUER, REUQUBLA. And the last chunk is quite easy. It's QUE. Now, as I write the Q, the U, and the E, all right, I now have 3 chunks. I may decide to look at that word and find something unique in it. There's 2 sets of QUE with an R in between. So at this point, I may put a parenthesis around the R just so they know this is the exact letters on each side of that R. And then I have them spell the entire word. ALBU, QUER, QUE. Now backwards, EUQ, REUQ, UBLA. Instructing them to always looking up and seeing it in their mind's eye. Once they are able to give it to me frontwards and backwards, it is at this point I have them write it 3 times. This will give them the kinesthetic anchor because they know the information. And if you have a child who struggles with writing or struggles with spelling, and if you see them the first night, they send them home either to put them in alphabetical order or to write them 3 times. When you don't know how to spell a word, writing the word 3 times, you're copying the word 3 times. It doesn't make it intuitive. If you memorize it frontwards and backwards and then write it 3 times, there's a kinesthetic anchor to your writing with that word. You start misspelling it as you're writing, it's almost like the pen will jump out of your hand. You'll have an anchor to it. So you want to do it in this order. Never write the word until you know it frontwards and backwards. Then it becomes simple to recall. You'll have instant recall of that information. Why do I rattle it off fast then? ALBUQER, QUE, EUQ, REUQ, UBLA. Frontwards, backwards, as fast as you can, creates an electrical response in the brain. This is really the untapped area of research of how important the electrical communication in the brain is. There are brain cells everywhere in our body. Do you realize in our heart we have 40,000 brain cells? Neurotransmitters, the same as in our brain, in our gut, in really much every cell of our body, there's constant communication. The actual heart and the brain control the sympathetic and parasympathetic signals. And very quickly, the sympathetic has to do with your emotions, your stress, which you get a lot with learners who struggle. All right, it has, and it affects the parasympathetics, which is all your bodily functions. When you get nervous, that's why you have a hard time speaking. You find a knot in your stomach, or you start sweating. Your body loses control because of the stress levels going up. When you can bring that more into sync and be more relaxed, you have intuitive knowledge. You have unconscious competence at certain things. So that writing of the spelling words is critical to be done after you learn it frontwards and backwards. And once you do that, all right, the word is there forever. Now, the word Albuquerque is a name of a capital. There's not a lot to talk about the word. But whenever someone knows the new word, all right, and they have to learn it, the meaning becomes as important as the spelling and the usage of the word. So if I'm learning the word Albuquerque, well, it's a memorization of the capital of New Mexico. If I'm learning a word like psychoneuroimmunology, I would first identify the meaning of the word and then break down the chunks to show where that meaning is. Now, psychoneuroimmunology is the mind's ability to affect the immune system to heal itself without drugs or intervention. So if you look at the word psycho, P-S-Y-C-H-O, neuro, N-E-U-R-O, immune, I-M-M-U-N, and ology, O-L-O-G-Y. I would break that down into 4 parts, and before I teach the spelling, I would explain each part. That psycho has to do with your psychology, your brain, your views and thoughts and emotions, everything psychological. Neuro is your neural connections in the brain, the synapses in your brain, the connections in your brain. Immune has to do with your immune system, how you heal. All right, how your T cells pop out to attack a disease or a virus that comes into the body. And then ology. Ever see the word ology, O-L-O-G-Y? What it means is the study of. The study biology, psychology. It doesn't matter what it is in the front. The ology on the end means the study of. So, you know that? You know the ending words. If you see an ology, you'll always know how to spell it. O-L-O-G-Y, Y-G-O-L-O. So each chunk has a meaning in this word. And understanding that meaning makes it easier to now memorize the word. And then we would do it. P-S-Y-C-H-O, H-C-O-Y-S-P, N-E-U-R-O, O-R-U-E-N, excuse me. And then I-M-M-U-N, N-U-M-M-I, and O-L-O-G-Y, Y-G-O-L-O, and then we write it 3 times. So not only will they know the spelling, but they'll also understand the meaning and where it came from. Poor spellers, they lose everything. All right? And obviously, poor spellers don't write as well. They're worried about words they can't spell when they're writing. They think of other words they can spell, and it destroys the creativity, the flow. When they become a great speller, you begin to see a difference in how they write. There's more confidence in what they write. They have more words to use when they write. Now, I have kids that come in that have a difficult time with attention and behavior. When their eyes are up and they're following the directions here, that doesn't come into play because they're not, well, I'm keeping them away from motion, I'm keeping them visual. And this is what I find every time I work with a child in my screening. So when a parent comes in for the very first time, we do a sensory motor visual screening. We identify the areas physiology-wise and sensory motor-wise and eye-wise where they're underdeveloped. Then we'll teach them about the cognitive work we do with the child, and then explain the learning strategies to them. As an example of a learning strategies, I will use spelling the very first time I meet a child. If it's child's in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, even third grade, I'll use the word Saskatchewan, Saskatchewan, Nawehtak, SAS, frontwards, backwards. If a child is fourth grade and above, I will teach them paradimethylaminobenzaldehyde, a 29-letter word. A 29-letter word backwards is EDYH, EDLAZ, NEBONI, MALYHT, EMIDARAP. Now, when I do this, I do it right in front of the parents, and a lot of times they tell me the kid is dyslexic, which they're not. All right, they learn that word in about 5 minutes, and they write it out. It's when they write it out that the parents make a comment to me. They're blown away that they can spell it frontwards and backwards. But a lot of these kids have problems with writing, taking forever to write words, to copy words, and so on. When they intuitively know the spelling of the word, this is what I'll hear from the parents. I've never seen them write this quickly or neatly. You see an enormous improvement, and the only reason for that is the stress is gone. They actually know the word. They have confidence. So they perform completely different based on that. So these are the keys just for spelling. When we get into science and geography and other subjects, there are other techniques that are involved, other expansion of it. But as far as spelling, this is as simple as it gets. And becoming unconsciously competent at this technique at a young age will serve you the rest of your life. This becoming a good speller. I was not a great speller. I was a good speller, but not a great speller. Now I'm a great speller. But there were a couple of dozen words I always had problems with spelling. If you're an adult, and it's not that many words you use in writing. There's several hundred words, actually, we use constantly if we write or speak and so on. If you have a dozen or 24 words, it would be nothing to learn these words frontwards and backwards and change your whole way of recalling that information. So when you work with your kid, if you're working in a group, if you're working by yourself, your emotional attitude is very important. Your communication with the person working with you is very important. And of course, if you're working alone, your self-communication is the most important thing. Most poor learners have negative self-talk. So when you're working with your child, or you're working with your students, always state things in the positives. Always build their confidence. Always catch them doing something right. With most parents, these are kids that maybe have problems. They're being yelled at. It's hard for the parents to separate the discipline in the home and then move on and help them with homework or help them study where that attitude is not carried over. It's critical. And that's for you too. How you hold your body, where you place your eyes has an enormous impact on how you affect your child. You need to model this behavior for your child. So when it comes, and what I'm teaching here is nonlinear learning. That once you learn it in any presentation. You'll see it anywhere. You'll have access to it where before that information would not be able to be retrieved because of how you learned it. So for many years, I would be principal for a day in the city of New York where business people and politicians would take over a school. They have 1,100 schools in New York. And we would go into the classrooms and we would observe. In my case, when I went into the school, I would teach the classes. And I'd go into a first grade class. I go up to the teacher. I said, can you tell me, point out who is your poorest speller in the class? And I would have that student come up. I would, of course, ask the class, who'd like to have fun? I'd need one volunteer who'd like to come up. And everybody would raise their hand. And I picked the child that the teacher pointed out as the poorest speller in the class. And in a matter of minutes, that child is spelling Saskatchewan frontwards and backwards. And you just can't believe the change in that child in that moment, to be able to spell that word frontwards and backwards. And for that teacher, I showed her how to do it for that child. And guess what? The entire class. And everyone in that class was spelling that word frontwards and backwards, regardless of what grades they were getting in spelling. This technique is universal. It works on everyone. And it's something that after becoming unconsciously competent, which requires what? Doing it every single day for an extended period of time. A habit takes anywhere from 21 to 45 days to develop. Something like this, a little less time. If you're doing it every day for a couple of weeks, you're going to become unconsciously competent at the technique pretty quick. So I'm going to include a lesson plan for those homeschooling and teachers that are out there, or even parents who like to look at the different techniques. I'm going to include our eye accessing cue sheet so you can read about it and also know the importance of eye accessing cues. So when you're working with your child, you know they're engaged or not by where their eyes are. And the third thing I want to remind you is that do not have your child write the words out until they can spell them frontwards and backwards, which means you do the spelling words individually, not all at once. You don't have them write them all at one time. They learn a word, they write it 3 times. They learn a new word, they write it 3 times. And this is the continuing thing you do until they're unconsciously competent, and then they can do it any which way they want. Now we're going to turn to our students and teach them Albuquerque frontwards and backwards in a matter of minutes. And I want you to learn how they respond and how they absorb the information. Thank you. All right, welcome back. And we're here with Sophia today, who's going to help us demonstrate our spelling strategy in our spelling clinic. We're going to be using a word today, Albuquerque, which phonetically cannot be spelled. So that's why we use that word. You have to visualize it to understand it. Now, when we learn a word, we always want to understand the definition, the meaning of that word. That enhances your memory of the spelling of that word. In this case, Albuquerque is the name of the capital of New Mexico. It really doesn't have a definition. So it's all visual, and that's why I chose to start off with this word. When I train teachers, I am hard-pressed to find one teacher in the room who could spell this word. It's because of the difficulty phonetically in spelling it. So the word Albuquerque is A-L-B-U-Q-U-E-R-Q-U-E. So, Sophia, A-L-B-U-Q-U-E-R-Q-U-E. That's what we're going to learn today. All right? Now, remember the foundational pieces to this. Number 1, how you hold your body and where you place your eyes. Every great learner on the planet looks up when they have to remember something or learn something. Every poor learner goes internal, either emotions and feelings which are negative or negative self-talk. By keeping your eyes up, you disattach yourself from emotion and you stay in a visual state. That's why whenever you get nervous or feel anxiety, by looking up will disconnect you. It's a pattern interrupt of how you're feeling, and you're creating pictures in your mind instead of noticing your feelings. So always look up. In the case of spelling, that's what every great speller does. They look up. Every poor speller goes internal. Second thing, your conscious mind can only process 2 to 7 chunks of information at any given moment. So we're going to chunk this word into 3 chunks. A-L-B-U-Q-U-E-R-Q-U-E. Now there's also a second method you can use because you look for commonalities in the word when you first study it. And you notice that there's a Q-U-E and a Q-U-E, same exact letters. And the only thing separating them is an R. Now I can learn this in 3 chunks or 4 chunks by making that R a separate chunk so I never forget it's right in between the Q-U-E and the Q-U-E. Make sense? So let's take it from the top. First 4 letters are A-L-B-U. Please look up and in your mind's eye write with your finger A-L-B-U. And how do you spell that?
A-L-B-U.
Backwards?
B-U.
Up. What is it backwards?
U-B-L-A.
Outstanding. Next chunk is Q-U-E-R. And by the way, anytime you have a consistent problem of remembering 1 or more letters in a word, if you would exaggerate, for example, let's say you forget the Q-U-E and you keep forgetting the R, you put a gigantic R right there. And that will help you remember that word. Make sense? Okay. So A-L-B-U, Q-U-E-R. Let's look at the Q-U-E-R. Look up. Write the Q, the U, the E, and the R. And how do you spell it?
Q-U-E-R.
Backwards?
R-E-U-Q.
And the first chunk backwards?
U-B-L-A.
Outstanding. Last chunk and we're done is just Q, U, and E. Make sense? Look up, write the Q, the U, and the E. And what is it?
Q-U-E.
Backwards?
E-U-Q.
Got it. Outstanding. How do you spell Albuquerque?
A-L-B-U-Q-U-E-R-Q-U-E.
Outstanding. What is it backwards?
E-U-Q-R-E-U-Q
Outstanding. Now please write it 3 times for me as fast as you can. Now the reason I have her writing it after we learn the word is to guarantee the kinesthetic anchor to the spelling of the word. Once you know it frontwards and backwards, by writing it 3 times, it will give you an anchor as you're writing that if you ever misspell it, it's almost like the pen will jump out of your hand because of the anchor to the visual and the writing. All right, was that difficult?
No.
That was pretty easy. Now, here's the thing. If you start practicing this with every word you have to learn, and learn it frontwards and backwards like this, in a very short period of time, you become unconsciously competent at it. And you'll be able to bang out 10 words in 10 minutes. It'll take you less than a minute to learn a word frontwards and backwards. You become better and better at the technique the more you practice it. And by making this the way you learn your spelling words, every time you need to learn a word will guarantee you are unconsciously competent at the technique. So remember the 3 things. How you hold your body, where you place your eyes. Second thing, how you chunk the information. Third thing, doing it backwards. Now there's a 4th thing you can do, it's called brain aerobics. By repeating it in your mind as fast as you can, creates an electrical connection in your brain to make that one chunk of information. So it's A-L-B-U-Q-U-E-R-Q-U-E, or E-U-Q-R-E-U-Q-U-B-L-A. So let's try a speed one real quick before we close out. Spell Albuquerque as fast as you can.
A-L-B-U-Q-U-E-R-Q-U-E.
Outstanding. Backwards?
E-U-Q-R-E-U-Q-L
Up.
B
Up.
U-B-L-A.
Outstanding. Okay, very good. A little bit of a stress there doing it backwards, right?
Yes.
That's good stress. The more you are exposed to that kind of stress, the less things will stress you out. That's the way to get rid of stress, is by learning how to manage your stress. So this is the first thing we're learning in our learning strategies. The foundational pieces are all the same. Your mind knows no difference between a letter, a word, a phrase, a meaning. It makes no difference to your brain. It's an electrical chemical response. When you take control of whatever information you have to study, and by looking at it up, by chunking it into small chunks, and by learning it frontwards and backwards, that information will go to long-term memory, and you'll have a 90% recall of the information you learned this way. Thank you so much. You did an excellent job, and we're going to have you back next time for our next learning strategies. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
If you have any questions on today's show, or any questions at all, you can leave them in the comments section of our YouTube channel. I read them every day, and we'll get back to you on each and every one requiring an answer. Please also subscribe to our Spotify and Apple podcast. Thank you for listening.